Thank you guys for joining us. There's some other folks that'll be rolling in here in a moment, but we're going to go ahead and start. Thank you for attending our panel on to build or not to build. And I got to tell you, I went back and forth on the title because there's a whole lot of opportunity with this one. So with to build or not to build versus to build or to buy. So special thanks to our panelists that are here on the call with us. Those are John, Doug, and Terry. I'm going to allow them to kind of introduce themselves first, of course. But before I do, can you guys see that slide okay? Are you guys seeing that with the to build or not to build?
Yep.
Sweet. Sounds good. All right. So first up, we've got John Morgan. He's a senior application developer with the Fidance. John, why don't you say hi and give everybody some context to what you do for Fidance?
Hello, everyone. John Morgan here. Been a developer for over a decade now. Been a consultant developer with the Finance for about 7 years now, and been working on many different projects from open source to enterprise worlds to from everything in between that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
John. Doug.
Yes. Hi, Spencer. Thanks. My name is Doug Detellum. I work for Mike Albert Fleet Solutions. I head up our software development practice, as well as participating in these types of evaluations and some product leadership duties that I have with some of our product lines. So that's in a nutshell. Yep.
Thanks, Doug. And then Terry.
Hi, Terry Hill. As you can tell from the picture, I've been around a while. Actually got my first PC in 1984 and started working on GW Basic then. And I currently work for Fidance as a developer in PHP and LAMP, Linux, PHP, MySQL. So just hanging around, waiting for the young guys to take over.
Terry, for some perspective, and I'm only saying it because you mentioned it first, you got your first computer 2 years before I was born.
Yeah, that's probably the case with 90% of the people on this call. I could be a lot of them's dad, and I could be some of them's granddad.
Well, you got a cool place in the mountains, man. So if you want to be pseudo grandpa to me, you just let me know. I'll come down, do some hiking, spend some time where you guys are. But anywho, thanks guys for introducing yourself. So looks like Matt says I'm with you. I'm with you, Terry. But one of the so at Defiance, there's amongst a bunch of things that we do, kind of our niche is augmenting enterprises with emotionally intelligent and versatile consultants. And so one of the ways or areas that we do that is in software. And we always get lots of questions related to whether a company should be building or buying a software. Usually those questions come from leaders that are non-technical, we'll say. So a lot of times it comes from folks that are they're not a vocational IT professional, or maybe they're on the business side of things and they're developing a product, or they're considering developing a product that they could license and launch aside from their business. And so we wanted to do a panel just simply on this topic of principles, if you will, on whether to build or to buy your software. So that's kind of the context of this. And so the first question that we kind of have planned here, I'm going to pose this one to Doug. So, Doug, in your time at Mike Albert, you've been there for, I think, a little bit over 2 years now, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So, how have you decided whether to build or buy software? How does that process work of making that decision inside of your organization?
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, it starts with a couple of basic questions, right? Some fundamental questions around what problem we're solving, what the expected outcome is going to be, what the value is. But really, it boils down a lot to, is it a differentiator for us or not? Is it part of our secret sauce, right? Um, we wouldn't necessarily consider our accounting journaling process part of what makes us unique or is part of the value proposition we have for our clients. Um, the vast majority of the time, if that's the answer to, is this a differentiator? If that is no, we default to off the shelf if and when there's a solution available. When it does become a differentiator, when it is something that is a, we can draw a direct correlation of what that software supports, what it does for us, and the value we provide to our clients, then the conversation becomes a little bit more involved and interesting of, is this a core competency that we have? Is this something we can support? Ultimately, sometimes it's decided by, does an off-the-shelf solution even exist? So it's nuanced in a couple of different ways, but the conversation flows differently depending upon the answer to that kind of that first question of, is this something that is core to Mike Albert's DNA? Is this something that makes us different than our competitors? And if it's not, the vast majority of the time, we're okay with just the off-the-shelf, out-of-the-box solution that solves that space for 95% of businesses.
Do you guys feel like have you, in your 2 years there, has there been situations where you guys have bought an off-the-shelf solution and you've gone, man, I wish we had just developed this, or the
Yes.
inverse of that?
Yes.
Tell me about
Um,
that. Tell me about
so
that.
I will say that might be a misconception on a lot of things, right? And I know that maybe we'll talk about it a little more in some of the upcoming content and questions that we have. Um, but just because you buy a solution off the shelf, if you have existing systems, it's not an off-the-shelf solution to just plug and play. There's integration work that needs to be done. There's understanding. There's you have to take that solution and fold it into your existing systems. There's never a completely hands-off implementation of a new piece of software if it's core to your business, right? Um, so what we find is we have to do some heavy investigation up front, talking engineer to engineer, saying, how does this work integration wise? Because even if we're not building it, we still have to maintain it. We still have to support it. We still have to integrate. Like, we still need the understanding of that software solution to be a core competency within our organization. So it's not like it's without work. It's not like we don't have to do anything to support and really roll it out successfully. And what we found is that there are times where the needs of the business, our business, and our other systems have put us in a situation where the integration effort is almost equivalent to what it would have been had we just built the solution we wanted from the first place. So that I won't say that does not happen often. It's not frequent, but it has happened before. And it's a struggle, but we've ended up in good places when that has happened. I don't know if we've ever entirely stripped out an off-the-shelf solution, but we've kind of changed our agreement with whoever that provider was, and I don't know, have ended up doing custom development on off-the-shelf solutions to enhance it and change it to fit what we need to get, the greatest value out of that solution.
I feel like it's really I'm in sales, but I have done a number of demos for products that we've thought about bringing into the mix for Fidance, and I think that, like, the common thing I hear from every product-based sales rep is something to the effect of, "Oh, this will work perfectly in your environment, and in terms of deployment, like, no issues. It's going to integrate perfectly with your tech stack, and everybody's going to have a great time, right?"
Right.
And I think that in of itself is already a challenge, but you had spoke to this briefly too about like bringing people up to speed on a technology is a whole different problem. And if it's core business function, right, it's affecting your business in a critical way, it's touching multiple stakeholders within the enterprise, right? Like, it can't just be,
Yes.
oh, my devs are getting hit by something new. It's, oh, my folks in operations are being hit by this,
Yes.
and downstream it's affecting accounting and accounts receivable. And I just think it can get really muddy really quickly,
Yes.
and I think it just speaks to how critical it is for deciding which route to go. And
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, that's it. You're right on. Because it's not just an IT decision. Because the whole point of, at least in our business, the ITS organization within the business exists solely to support the rest of the business, operations, sales, every other functional business unit we have. We don't live in our silo. We transcend all of the other parts of the business, and ultimately it's we are not the decision makers, we're the advisors, and we can come up with the best decision we can with the information we have, but ultimately it's our users and our associates who have to live with it, right? So we need to engage them early and often, and really not only do we need to put it through the technical paces, that solution, and understand the integration, before we make any decision, we need the users, the associates, the business owners, all of them to really dive deep, demo, just kind of all along the way. So it's we need to be lockstep with the business when we make those decisions. It's not just something IT is introducing this new solution to solve your problem. It's no, this is you're introducing this solution and IT is supporting it.
Really good, man. I think that speaks to our next question here, which is for Terry, which is what's one crucial question you're asking yourself as you're making these decisions? Because ultimately, it's not just a question of the stakeholder that's directly making the decision, but it's the downstream effects of that decision. So whether you're building or spying, who that is affecting the most. So Terry, what's one crucial question that you would ask yourself if you were deciding whether to build or buy? Um, what's something you're asking what's a question you're asking yourself?
One of the things that I've come across over the years is how well does this software fit? As a company, you have certain policies and procedures, and you have certain ways of doing things, and a lot of your people have muscle memory on how to get stuff done, not necessarily on typing or anything like that, but just the procedure for getting something done, how to get a purchase order through the system, to get inventory in, and so my biggest question is usually, am I going to have to adapt my business to this software, or will this software adapt to my business? And to me, if the off-the-shelf package forces you to adapt to the software, it's not a good buy-in for me. I mean, there are some things procedurally that could need to be changed, and that software could show you that those things are problems that need to be rectified or at least addressed. But it shouldn't come to the point to where you have to change the way you do everything in order to accommodate a piece of off-the-shelf software.
Yeah, I think it depends too on where you are in that journey. Because if you're a founder and you have this really cool idea for a product, right, you're in a completely different space than if you're a seasoned business that's been around for years, like somebody like in Mike Albert's situation, right? And so I really like the way you described that, though, of does the software, does your business have to adapt to the software, or does the software adapt to the needs of your
Right.
business? Yeah, really well said, Terry. What are you thinking, Doug?
I was gonna say that is it's not only does the business have to adapt to the software, but if they do, are they willing to, right? It's a willingness to do so. I will say that exactly what Terry just talked about is the primary reason why I answered previously when you said, have we ever had a situation where we bought something off the shelf and wish we did the other thing? And it's exactly because of that scenario. It required adaptation from the business to kind of fit into that box of the off-the-shelf software solution. And the business was unable, unwilling, it doesn't really matter which. The business did not have the appetite to change their processes which led us down the path of, okay, now we have to modify this off-the-shelf solution, which wasn't intended to be modified to fit our business process. And that becomes basically not having that conversation Terry just talked about up front made the project outrageously more expensive, and really didn't deliver the outcomes we had initially intended it to.
So one of the questions that you're asking yourself, Doug, and Terry, you're asking yourself is, well, what's the appetite for change, right? So I guess the first question maybe is, well, who does this affect downstream, right? And then the two is, how willing are they to adjust their process, or how much adjustment is there going to be to their process? Do you feel like, Doug or Terry or John, any of you can take this, do you feel like when you advise companies or people inside of your company specifically, do you feel like you advise them on that? Hey, are you considering how this is going to affect your end user as much as it's going to affect those that are functionally using and benefiting from the software?
Basically, in my experience, you need to get buy-in from the stakeholders, period. And they need to get buy-in from everybody well, the majority of the people that work for them. So they need to make sure they've gotten everybody understanding the process, and not just standing pat with, no, we're not going to do it. No, we're not going to do it. And you just got to make sure that everybody has a certain amount of buy-in.
Yes, and add on to that, the tech stack matters. I've seen times where a solution will be written in a tech stack that's completely different than the company's using. And you got to make sure that that is something that's accounted for when choosing that solution.
Yeah, that's a big one right there, John, because if you don't have a tech stack that you can um, jump into or change via. I mean, if you don't have if you're used to being set up with a SQL database and you've got something that's gone into something else out there that's just really weird and stupid, you're not going to get anywhere.
Third question here is along these same lines, which is, what principles guide your decision-making process when deciding to build versus buy? John, there's three things that you had shared with me previously that I'd love for you to share with the audience, and we're kind of touching on them here, at least in the macro view. But what are the three key principles that guide a stakeholder's decision on whether to build or buy?
Okay, so of the three, the first one we got is the cost. So I'd like to sit down and look at the cost of licensing the software, whether it be per user or it's just a one-time upfront cost. Do we need to host it ourselves? Um, Developing the software, the time it takes for that, as well as hosting our own solution. Those are costs that have to be weighed against each other to make an informed opinion on which one you're going to choose. Do you want to spend the adapting your team to build the solution or integrating the solution? And those are just some things to think about, take into account. Then also the time required or the scope of the project. Is this something that needs to be done right away, or it's like a small script that just needs to save some time for, say, the accounting team that helps them run the numbers faster? Or are we trying to build the next Spotify? So those are things that we want to definitely take a look at, because we don't want to be reinventing something that already exists out there. And the business return on investment. When we look at it, if it's something we can build and the customer that we're building it for, or ourselves who we're building it for, if we can license it out to other people, actually develop it in-house and advertise it to other people for them to use.
It's good. So cost, time, business ROI are kind of your three principles that are kind of guiding that decision-making process. More practical question here. So let's get a bit more granular. What are the advantages to buying software? And it's funny that I'm asking that because I think that I advise clients like whenever you can, you should try to buy off-the-shelf solutions. But what are the benefits to that?
I will, so just to add on to what John just said about the principles that guide your decision making on it, it's for us specifically too, a lot of it is scalability of the solution as well, especially if, we are anticipating our business to grow, our client base to grow. If it's a client-facing solution that we have, the it's and we buy something off the shelf, it's also okay, this may be the best choice for us today, but say, 5 or 10 years from now, if we have 50% or double the growth of the users and just the volume of data and the number of transactions being run through this system, is it capable of supporting that? And I think that's something that we try to keep in mind as well, because a lot of the off-the-shelf solutions, at least in our space and what we do, are kind of intended for specific segments of the market. And we may, over the next few years or several after, we may actually be in a different segment for what they're doing. So trying to keep that into account on day one, obviously we can't tell the future, but trying to be cognizant of those types of things. Those are some of the things that we keep in mind as well when we try to make those decisions.
Agreed.
So, John, question for you specifically is related to the advantages of buying software. So we do all kinds of scoping calls together, and I've been in a number of meetings together, and it seems like especially when we meet with folks, and Dane is actually talking about this in the chat, for folks that are identifying your competency or what your business does, like how you make decisions on software is going to depend based off of whether you're an IT company or whether you're a software company. If you're a SaaS company, right? It's certainly going to affect that. I've observed with folks that are generally non-technology leaders, the solution to a problem is let's just create a software. Let's build something new that the world's never seen, even though you can Google it and you'll see a dozen other possible solutions for it. But what are the advantages that you would say, John, to buying software off the shelf?
Oh, definitely. Like you just mentioned, there's a lot of times where people aren't, I mean, even myself, like there's software out there that I don't even know exists for a problem until I start looking into it. It may be very specific. Um, so a lot of times the solution's already out there and somebody already thought of that, thought of it. So there's no point in reinventing the wheel when it's already out there. There's no point in building up a development team or getting your development team to do it and support it in the future when it's already out there for you to use. And sometimes just a minor tweak.
Yeah, we had a year and a half ago, we did a project with a roofing company, and they wanted us to basically develop a software that's critical to their business function. And this business function would certainly, it's touching maybe the most valuable part of their business, like what makes their business work, so to speak. Um, but it also would amplify that. It would make that specific process of their business. It would enable them to um, do more sales, be more efficient in their job sites. Like it was a pretty significant process that this software solution would bring to it. And so we just discovered that we ended up realizing that the solutions that were out there that touched that process weren't nuanced enough but for them to buy that off the shelf. And so they decided to go the route of developing that from scratch. We actually just wrapped up the first phase of that recently for that company. But each of you have talked quite a bit about getting buy-in, right, from stakeholders inside the business or whomever you're touching with that software, right? Terry, can you speak a little bit more to why it's so important to develop a vision for your software? Create a vision, get buy-in, talk about more about why that's so critical.
Well, one of the things that you've got to decide is if you're in a niche market and you're building the software because you're there, um, then you need to make sure that everybody's okay with it. But from the standpoint of the software, you also need to decide what's the life of this software. Is this going to be a piece that we just keep in house and we just use it for our business, or do we have some aspirations at some point in time of maybe making it a full blown product that we can resell and bring in other other people in the same industry to this software. Because a lot of times if you do it right, you can pretty well develop a software niche and run with it. So it's a viable solution for doing that. Um, and as far as getting people in the buy-in process, that's always a biggie because if you don't have buy-in, it's going to stop. The project's not going to go anywhere if you don't get enough people who believe it can be done.
That's good. Last question here is for Doug, and then we're going to move to some impromptu questions from the audience. But Doug, could you speak specifically to how you assess the ROI on building versus buying? So very practically, um, how are you assessing the cost of that? And how are you communicating that to stakeholders inside of your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So Terry just brought up a good point on the end user piece. Who the end user is does impact how we evaluate the ROI of a product. Is it internal associates? Is it an internal tool? Is it an internal product? Or is it client facing? Does it impact our clients? The ROI process is can be significantly different between the two, right? When it comes to an internal ROI, very few of the things we do from a systems standpoint, from an application standpoint, are going to be able to be directly tied to, we're a fleet leasing organization, right? We lease vehicles to other companies. Very few of the software solutions, internal tools that we develop are ever going to be able to be pointing directly at, oh, we've leased X number more vehicles this year because of this software that you guys built for us. So we have to be a little more cognizant of where the value we're getting is coming from. So we tend to focus a little bit more on the internal efficiency of what we're doing now. So it's if it's something entirely new, cost is evaluated on time taken for developers to spend working on developing this solution. Not just development, we have QA capacity necessary. We also try to allocate time required by some of those business champions for because no project ever gets started without somebody really advocating for it. And they're going to be involved through the entire process. And they're not going to be doing whatever their other day job may be. So trying to just recognize as much as we possibly can up front, these are the costs, whether or not they're tangible, clear on a line item on an invoice, or if it's, the cost of a person's time spent doing this instead of something else for the business. So we try to just do the math on that, bring that out, and then that's our cost. We also take into some of the considerations around, does this require ongoing maintenance and support? How do we train people on it? We try to be as comprehensive as we can be on a lot of those things. And then we really try to nail down the business value, the expected value outcome of this solution. That is not necessarily an IT responsibility, nor should it be, right? It's we've been presented with a problem. We provide solutions, alternatives, everything else. But once that solution is developed, realizing that value isn't a practice for the team that did the development. It's a practice for the team that's going to take it and use it and implement it and have it make their lives better. So it's really a joint effort. We evaluate it from the cost perspective, the time component, and the ongoing maintenance and everything. So a lot of ours is focused on the cost of the solution, but we really do partner heavily as much as we possibly can with the business to really coalesce around those value, the expected value outcomes and that realizing that value and what the plan is for it. So we even do go-to-market type strategies for internal products within the organization to try and I guess capture that expected value there. So it's once as much as best as you can do on that math problem, then it's really that. It's okay, here's the math. Tell us if it's worth it. Because we're a financial company and we're clever, we also have, expected, we do present net value. Like we try to do expected 3-year ROI, 6-month, 1 year, 3-year, however, and then we have internal rate of returns that we need to match. So we try to be scientific with a lot of it, but these are primarily for internal. When it's external, the client experience weighs heavily, and it's a little murkier when you try to quantify how many dollars and cents is a client experience worth, right? But so it's a little, I'll say the barrier for approval is potentially lower for a client experience type project, but I'd say the project plan and the project, we'll say the project proposal is a higher barrier to it because you better have talked to clients, you better have understood who's going to adopt, and at least have, 1 or 2 or 3 touch points with clients to say they're asking for this, they will adopt this. This is the plan for building it, right? Because we don't know the voice of the client without talking to the client. So that's a little bit more of what we focus on when it's client facing versus an internal ROI and those evaluations.
I know that whenever I watch Shark Tank, one of their favorite questions they ask people is what's the cost that it takes to ascertain your customers? Like, what's your customer acquisition cost? And we're a service-based company, and so we're not a product-based company. And so those questions are always really tricky to answer as well. How much is that experience for the customer or what we're bringing to the customer? How many dollars, like, can we really assign a dollar value to that, right?
Right.
It's really tricky, man. Like, figuring out how much their experience is going to be impacted downstream from the decisions that you make about your software.
Yeah. People much smarter than me help solve those problems.
Terry or John, do you guys have anything you want to add onto what Doug just shared on that question?
I don't really have anything to add to it, other than the fact that that's what the accountants usually wind up running is the return on investment.
Agreed.
Great. So, a question we did not have planned is I'm just curious, what would be, give me your guys, so all three of you are developers in trade. You're not just in leadership and software. Tell me, like, what is your language, your programming language, your library? Like, give me like your nerd out. This is a really cool stack that I've seen, or it could be a singular programming language that you do, but each of you give me something off the top of your head that's like, man, this is pretty cool. What this right here?
there's not just one singular thing that you can really answer, right? So I was a Microsoft guy originally, and .NET Stack, and all of those things, and now I'm in an environment where most of our new development is using Golang. Like it's just an evolution all the time, and I think that might be the most exciting thing for me, is that the the fact that there's very rarely ever just one tool for the job. And it's the challenge is finding the right one. So it's we I don't know. It's my favorite part is balancing the new shiny object, the newest, coolest languages and frameworks and capabilities with, what can we support, and what can we develop in, and what can we maintain over time. And then, just striking that balance, right? So the coolest stack to me is the one that we have and can support.
Doug, I 100% agree with you on that.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I kind of fell into, because whenever I started programming, it, actually I started on a Hero Heathkit robot in 1982 in assembly language. But most of the programming experience I had early on was mainframes, IBM 36s, AS400s, 38s, Harris/7s. So one of the things that I picked up over the years is it's not so much to know exactly what the bleeding edge is. It's okay to be on the cutting edge, but you don't want to be on the bleeding edge. But you also got to remember that a lot of what you're tasked to do is old stuff. You got to be able to go backwards in time. And the hardest part of that scenario is trying to figure out what the guy before you was thinking about that and what he was doing. I mean, because if you can't get into the old programmer's mind to some degree, you can't figure out. It's more difficult to figure out what they were attempting to do.
Doug and I have a friend, TJ, and I think their company, they have a saying, which is you have 6 months to complain and complain about the guy that was there before you. But by the end of the 6 months, you better have solved or fixed whatever it was that they did wrong.
Sometimes we don't realize what they did wrong until a couple of years later. So we're going through a lot of significant modernization efforts from some of our core existing applications, and we're like, man, if only I could have been there when they had the conversation about, why they decided this, right? So a lot of it is you have to approach it with the mindset of, I'm sure that individual had, whatever competence was required, had best intentions, made the best decision they were able to with the information they had at the time. We're now smarter, so we can come up with a better solution, but we shouldn't judge what happened in the past, because in some cases, our developers who made those decisions in the past are also the developers working on the modernization efforts 15 years later.
I looked at my own code 2 weeks later and said, "What was I thinking?"
Right.
Well, one of the things is you do the best you can do at the time with the tools that you have. And I
Yes.
mean, it's like one of the comments I made was I was working on a security solution, thought I was being smart about what I was doing, and wound up realizing I was just being stupid. So, it's always a learning process. I mean, even if you are working on a piece of code that has been bulletproof for a long time, you can always go back and look at it and say, hey, I can change this and makes it better. This will improve the speed of it. This will do that and the other. So, it's always a change.
The question that John Taylor has is, as developers, how do you see AI and code development assistance? I'm sorry, let me repeat. I'm going to read this comment. As developers, how do you see AI and code development assistance, number one, speeding up code development and delivery, and number two, reducing costs due to time savings and accuracy of code?
Right. I mean, I can from our perspective, we've used Copilot. We've implemented it and just, proving it out and trying to do some of those things. I would say the determination that we've made, or kind of the approach we're taking as of right now, is that the only thing we can really get out of it today is potentially speeding up the tedious piece of writing the code itself, but you always have to understand what it's outputting. Like we would never, I won't say never, today we would not let a junior developer use Copilot to create code that we had anticipate to go to production. A senior developer is the one who has to, review those outputs, understand what it's actually doing. The same reason why we don't view Stack Overflow as a documentation source. Like you don't just get an answer and implement it. You have to understand what the answer is. You have to understand how the problem is being solved. So I would say we're not experiencing any reduced costs around accuracy of code because we're still the ones writing the code. We're just using those outputs as a starting point, potential some boilerplate to really let the developers solve the problem and not worry about, tediously writing, 10 lines of code to answer a simple question. So there are some benefits to it. It's not something we leverage heavily in the code generation space though, yet. Because it's not we lack trust in it at the moment, we'll say.
Exactly. Some things can be taken out of context with it, and it'll assume certain things that you didn't intend for it to do. So you got to know exactly what it's spitting out. And I noticed like a lot of times, like Doug, you said about writing boilerplate code. Like if there's a bunch of HTML that needs to be written,
Yeah.
that's fine. It can do that because there's no logic involved in it. But another thing I like using AI for is just bouncing, like using it as like a rubber duck to bounce ideas off of to make sure that I'm thinking this through correctly. And sometimes it'll ask me, have you thought about doing it this way? Or I need clarification on this. And then I think to myself, oh yeah, it's that's what I'm missing. Or that's what I need help with. So definitely I would never trust AI just to write code and push it out yet.
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably a point to it, and you alluded to it, John. I think with our developers, the reason we pay them isn't to write code, right? It's to solve the hairy, complex domain problems we have, which AI tools, generative AI, they don't have the context necessary to solve those problems. So our developers are spending the vast majority of their time thinking about solutions to problems that are unique in our space, in our business, and that's why they get paid well. They don't get paid well to just write lines of code. They get paid well to solve problems. So when we can spin up our own instance of generative AI that can take in the entirety of our domain and then solve complex problems we deal with independently as a business and not problems that are, solved by 95% of other companies in a well-defined space, I think we'll get a lot more value out of it.
Matt Darple asks, as you consider cloud-based solutions, especially purchased slash subscription capabilities, to what degree are you confident that they can be relied upon to ensure security and privacy? Do you think that these days it's equally secure as on-premise implementations? This is a software security question.
Right. So
Yeah.
to Matt, I would reference a little bit of what Dana mentioned earlier, kind of about halfway through. He asked about what are the core competencies? Are you an IT company? Is IT a core for you, or is your core something else? And we partner for IT, right? So we're a mid-market, family-owned business delivering fleet leasing solutions to our clients. We are not, will never be a leading practitioner of IT security. We try to buy that fractional expertise. We partner with providers who will perform those types of audits for us on potential solutions that we integrate with. We worry about, compliance and certifications from the partners that we provide. I would say yes, if that is their business, if our cloud providers, if our subscription-based solutions, if that's their business, we obviously do our due diligence, but we have no real aspirations to be a more of an expert in their space than they are. We kind of understand our place and we rely heavily on them, but we do audit our potential providers and make sure that they are providing those things that we need.
Yeah, I can speak to this question too. So a couple things come to mind. The first is cybersecurity. Think of security like a spectrum. So it's not your black and white, I'm secure versus not secure. There's always some kind of risk to your organization that you're incurring. And so um, whether an implementation is more secure or less secure, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, I think is a matter of how well you've equipped your organization from a security standpoint. Because 90% of security ends up being a people problem. It's educating people on cybersecurity. It's what's a phish email. It's man in the middle attacks. It's building. You can have tools in place, right, to reduce your risk. You can have a SOC in place to monitor your environment, your applications, right? But ultimately, um, if that culture isn't baked into your company, that is, oh, we all have a responsibility to be cyber secure. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't. I would say that that's the right question to be asking, not necessarily whether it's more secure or less secure to deploy an application in the cloud versus on-prem. Um, I would also say, maybe on a more practical perspective, I always ask vendors that I meet with, hey, where does our data go? So if we're going to be using your application, do you just do you just get our data and now all of a sudden like our client information belongs to you? That's the first question that I always ask. A year ago around this time, we had a demo with a product that was like a streamline your pen test reporting documentation. So the test was manual, but then it could produce a report on your behalf versus you have to manually create that. And all of that data ultimately like was given like that company was given access to our data regardless of whether we had the application on the server or in our cloud. And that was an immediate disqualifier for us because if you're a consulting organization and you touch all kinds of different companies, you can't have your data sitting in places that, because that's not just yours, it's your client's data, right? So from a more practical perspective, a great question you can always ask is, hey, where does our data go? Who has access to it? And how secure is that company? That's something that we've been engaged about previously is, hey, can you actually do an audit on this provider that we have inside of our network, on their security posture, because their application is a critical part of our business. So certainly, the right question is, how well have you built a security culture in your company? But then more practically, I would say, where's your data going? Who has access to it, regardless of whether you're building or buying? Any other questions here? We're coming up to our time here. Let's go ahead and call it, guys. So thank you so much for attending our panel on to build or not to build. So some housekeeping notes just before we head out here is um, right after this meeting, you guys will get a survey or an email from me that'll ask you for your advice on a survey. Please fill that out. We would appreciate your insight on how this panel went so we can improve as we do these more in the future. And then second thing is that I'll be following up with each of you individually to check in and see if there's anything that we can do to support your organization. Big special thanks to Doug and to John and to Terry for sharing their time with us. I know it's very valuable. And frankly, I know all three of you are really busy people. So thank you so much for your guys' time and for the audience for attending.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
It's great.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Spence.
sir. Bye.
Thanks, guys.